What's going on, everybody? It's Rowaija coming at you with a brand new video, and of course it is that time of the month again where I bring to y'all my monthly tier list for Yu-Gi-Oh! And this one's going to be a little bit special compared to usual because while I don't believe, to my knowledge, we have any new product coming out in the month of April, we do have the 250th Yu-Gi-Oh! Championship Series events going on, I believe just a day or two after this video goes up, which of course is very exciting. With 3 different YCS events going on at once, I'm really interested to see how the top cut charts for each region turns out, and so I hope this tier list can at least partially reflect that. Before we do get into the video though, I do want to announce that I now have a Patreon. There's a $1 tier and a $5 tier, with the former allowing your name to show up on a splash screen in every video, and the latter having not just that, but also other goodies like potential early video access, free use of all of my PNGs that I create, and most importantly, you get to help come up with the new deck ideas for Sleeper Sunday. There is of course no obligation to join, however it is something that if you're interested in order to support my expenditures and the channel directly, should you wish to do so. But with that out of the way, I don't want to waste any more of your time. Let's go ahead and get right into my competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! Tier list for the April 2023 format. So starting off our tier list, of course, we have Castor. Ever since the support out of Photon Hypernova, this has been jumped around as the deck to beat. However, a lot of people have slowly started to realize, like, maybe it's not as great, but I believe it really depends on the eye of the beholder, because Castor is an interesting deck because it has a lot of counters. And so a lot of people like jump in with these counters, and then Castor ends up playing around those counters, for example, a Rise Heart Pass to play around things like Nibiru, Lava Golem, etc. And once they start countering these counters, the people stop playing the original counters, and so then that kind of allows them to have a little bit more wiggle room in order to go back to their original playstyle. For example, again, I think that Nib was super played once Castor got this wave of support released, and then eventually they started playing the Rise Heart Pass stuff, and then Nibiru slowly started coming out of deck lists, maybe moving to the side if at all. And so now I think that people are going to start playing the Zone Lock build again, or it's not really a different build, but the Zone Lock combo, I should say, and people aren't going to be as prepared because they expect like the more simple combos. Not to mention, so long as Diablosis the Mind Hacker is not banned, it's going to continue to warp deck building for both the main and the extra deck, so that you don't lose multiple copies or singular copies of things that are really important to your deck. And so because of this, I think Castor is still the deck to beat. Another reason is it basically has the highest power level out of almost any of the decks right now, with the exception of like maybe Branded. And of course, as we saw with Tier Limit, having the highest power level ends up being really, really big. So while Castor isn't seeing like the super dominant top cut success and stuff, there's still several regional event top cut pie charts where you can just see almost half of it, if not over half of it, being Castor anyway. So I feel like honestly it deserves to still be called the deck to beat, and it's probably going to see a lot of representation at all 3 of these 250th YCS events. Next up on our list is Plunder Patrol, and Plunder Patrol is a deck that I had really high hopes for, even with Tier Limit still being a deck, but especially after Tier Limit ended up getting hit so severely. But the main problem with Plunder is that while they do have a native out to Castor by giving the opponent the Yord token, so they can't special summon their Castor monsters, they still struggle significantly with the Walking Macrocosmos, and their power ceiling, they can do a lot, but their end board has not too amazing of a payoff. Their best end board is typically like a Monster Negate and an Omni. Their best, most consistent end board, I should say, because you can get some really big end boards with this deck, but overall just ends up not doing as much, even in a format where the power ceiling is so low. So it has been seeing some top cut success though. I believe it actually won a regional, and so I do want to put it at the top of the rogue category. Depending on how this shapes up, it might go at the bottom of tier 2. It has been seeing that little bit of top cut success, but I don't think it's too much to warrant putting it very high at all. On the contrary, we have a deck like Sword Soul, which has absolutely skyrocketed in the amount of top cuts since Tier Limit format. Of course, as I mentioned in all of these sorts of videos and my top 5 videos, Sword Soul just wasn't a bad deck, it just suffered from the better decks being so much better. Like, the power gap back in Tier Limit format was like Tier Limit, Sprite kind of in the middle ground, and then everything else was like down here. However, with Tier Limit not being a threat, of course, and with some of the best decks right now not really playing through too many disruptions, Sword Soul has been absolutely showing people what it's worth. You have super easy 1 to 1.5 card combos that can access things like an Impermon legs, free banish and burn for both special summon monsters and back row, or more popularly an Omni negate, which is huge for things like evenly matched in the main deck right now. And then of course, Sword Soul Blackout, considering that most of the decks right now need at least 2 bodies on board, is kind of just GG's most of the time. And then of course, it's also amazing at going second with things like Incredible Ecclesia and Vishuddha. And so honestly, it's no surprise why it's been seeing at least a top in I think every single event so far since the Castor stuff came out and tier limit stuff was put into the ground. And so I do think it deserves a spot in the tier 1.5 category. Up next on our list is a deck that a lot of people were really mad at me for forgetting. Like, I had an entire comment chain of one dude arguing with like 10 dudes about why Dark World was secretly the best deck, and then I had like a bunch of other comments like, no Dark World? Where's Dark World? Where would you put Dark World? Look, y'all, I can only remember so many decks. I'm probably gonna have people in the comments telling me I missed a different one. But Dark World is actually not too bad. So in the beginning, it had a bit of a shaky start, not just on its release, but also on the Structured X release, I should say, because this deck's old. But on the release of the Photon Hypernova stuff, it kind of struggled a little bit there, but it ended up coming through in the end, and it has several tops and I believe 1 or 2 regional wins. So I do want to put it in the tier 2 category. The cool thing about Dark World is that there's just so much going on, it can totally overwhelm your opponent. Like, they won't know what to hit with their hand traps, they'll kind of like blank out and not pay as much attention. They'll hit like one thing and then you still have a bunch of other things to go with. And then not to mention ripping up to 4 cards out of your opponent's hand, not by discarding, not by banishing, but by forcing your opponent to put them back in the deck is massive. The deck does struggle, however, against things like the Walking Macrocosmos. Going second in general can end up being a problem for this deck depending on if like the dangers get sniped wrong. Not to mention, I believe with all of the combo stuff in the deck, especially with the dangers, you don't really have as much room for hand traps or even board breakers in the main deck, and so you can struggle there, but it does have a lot of overwhelming power on its side, and with things like Grapha over Dragon Overlord or Dragon Lord of Dark World, whatever his name is, this deck can put up some really nasty stuff. Next on our list, we have Dolce, and similarly to Plunder Patrol, Dolce actually did see some top cut success, and I believe, again, they also won a regional, maybe even 2, but I think it was just a regional win and like 2 regional tops, maybe, if that. So I think I do want to put the deck in Rogue. Admittedly, it did lose some of the Ishizu stuff, but it still has the little bit that's left. But the main problem with Dolce is that they revolve so heavily around disrupting the graveyard, really, with Glass Souffle, that they end up just not really doing much of anything else. Like, the best end boards are like Glass Souffle, Promenade, and if you're really, really lucky with your Vernasolves, you can get like a rank 4, but like I think most of the time it's still not a very good rank 4 because you're locked into Earth, so I think Rogue is the good option to put it, even below Plunder Patrol. I think the deck is still really cool, especially, you know, Tiramisu is one of the best boss monsters in the entire game. Literally, the best removal is non-targeting shuffling removal. But the problem is that going second right now just isn't, like, the most amazing thing, and also, if they get their Petting Cessor Ash, they're gonna be in for a really rough spot. So yeah, I think my Dolce is still a really cool deck, but unless we get something like the OCG just got and got Glow Up Bold back or something, yeah, I think it's a no from me, dog. Another no for me on this list is going to be Invoked, y'all. This deck hasn't existed for ages. Your best bet was to play like Invoked Tier during Tier format and snag some unsuspecting wins, but I mean, genuinely, normal summoning Alistair is not going to cut it right now. Up next on our list is Drytron, and Drytron is also a deck that kind of struggled a little bit, but honestly has really showed just how strong it is, and that's namely because every single build of Drytron is just nasty. Like, all of it's toxic. Either you're staring down, like, a bunch of Herald of Perfection negates, not Ultimateness, you play Perfection for the Dawn. You're staring down a Vanity's Ruler, staring down the Amber Factor Pain. To an extent, the Megalith Bethor stuff can end up being really gross, but the cherry on top of this format is the Magician of Black Chaos Max, which they're using. Initially, it was Transonic Bird, I think it was, but now they're using Dynamondo to literally just get a free Azathoth that they can loop perpetually as many times as they really want. And the problem with a lot of decks having super powerful floodgates like that is that they usually don't have enough on the crackback, or they barely have enough to kill. Similar to, for example, the branded Expulsion Lock. If they end up going for a kind of jank version of it, or if they get their branded Fusion Ashed, they don't have enough to come back with the OTK. Drytron, however, has some of the most insane recursion out of any deck, that it's no wonder it's been seeing several tops. Not as much as Dark World, admittedly, and I don't think it's won any of them, but it has been seeing a lot of tops, and I feel like this is a very nasty deck to play right now, and a lot of people, especially without Bystials, especially if there's not as many branded players in your local scene on Bystials, this can definitely catch people off guard and steal you some free wins. Next on our list, we have Eldritch, and Eldritch I want to put above Invoked at least, but y'all, this deck has been... I don't think I've seen a single Eldritch top. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I had a notepad document with all the tops, but I ended up losing it to a power outage during a storm. However, I think Eldritch didn't get a single top since Photon Hypernova format started, with the Castor being best deck. And so, it's just really weird. I mean, again, it's better than Invoked, because you can still set 5 pass, and while there are people playing outs to that because of Labyrinth and stuff, you can still sit on things like Skill Drain, D-Barrier, whatever, and there's not very many Bystials or anything going around. However, Eldritch is still not a very amazing deck to play right now, especially considering going second against Castor is an absolute nightmare. Next up, we are going to have Branded, and Branded is going to be the second deck in our Tier 1 category. So, Branded has really proven itself. It was already initially going to be a really strong deck come Tier format with Kshatri-La. However, with Tier gone, Castor is the only thing, or like technically only thing that stands in this deck's way. But even on top of that, Branded Fusion being a 1-card out to Castor end boards because of Dragoon, especially if they try to go for just a Rise Heart pass against you, you kind of just have a free Castor matchup unless they just block all your back row zones or hit all of your Albazes. A lot of people, funnily enough, were saying the deck was starting to fall off, similarly to how Castor was kind of struggling for a little bit there, but suddenly it had a big resurgence again. Like, literally, people kind of underestimate decks because of, like, certain regions and everything like that. It's like, if it does badly in one event, but then really good in another event, it's probably because one event was prepared for it with a bunch of Ash Blossoms and stuff, and the other just wasn't prepared for it enough. If you do want to see a branded deck profile and a combo tutorial, I do currently have a branded Despia deck profile up on the channel, and in the next couple of days, I believe it is April 2nd, I'm going to have a combo tutorial to go along with it as well. I think it's a really fun deck. It's definitely the one I've been playing for the format, and for the foreseeable future, even if Expulsion's gone with the Gimmick Puppet lock, I think this deck is going to remain in the Tier 1 category. Next up on our list, we have Fluanderies, and this is a deck that I genuinely, I don't know if it was last tier list or the tier list before, but I really downplayed this deck, and now, honestly, I deserve to eat my words. I think Flunder is actually really strong right now. I'm going to put it at the top of Tier 2, and it's probably one of the better Tier 2 to Rogue decks you can play. Because yes, without Barrier Statue, you do lose one of your best auto-win buttons, but you still have another in the form of Harpy's Featherstorm. N-Pen is still a really strong boss monster and walking Floodgate, and just being able to play on your opponent's turn is so good, hence why Tier was so good. Plus with Castor banishing all your stuff and just fueling cards like Toucan, it's really, really solid. Not to mention, you're already playing cards like Duality and Prosperity in order to access your 1-card combos or 1.5-card combos, but those cards can coincidentally also grab really strong board breakers like Evenly Match, Book of Eclipse, etc. right now, and so I think that Fluanderies does deserve all of the tops it's been getting, and it's something you really don't want to end up sleeping on this format because it might take you by surprise. Next on our list is Exo Sister, and god, as much as I hate this deck, I will admit it did get a couple of tops. I will put it, either higher Rogue, end of Tier 2. I think just to spite Exo Sister players because they keep saying it's like one of the hidden best decks or whatever, I'm going to put it below Plunder Patrol. But I will admit it has gotten a few tops, which honestly, it took me a little bit by surprise. I was caught a bit off guard by this deck because I really didn't expect it to do too much because, granted, it's a very format-dependent deck. If you want to play it in like the Tier 2 to 1.5 category, you have to wait for a format like Tier format where there's a bunch of graveyard stuff going around. But it's mainly, I believe it's Returnia is the really good banish card, so I think that's like the biggest thing there. But to be fair, even if you're just ending on a couple of banishes, the rank 4 pool is still like the best pool in the entire game, and so it's really no wonder that you can at least cheese some free wins with this deck. Next up on our list, we have Draco Slayer, and I think Draco Slayer is a really cool deck. The main problem is that right now, it's not a very good deck. It has seen a couple of tops, so I will put it, I'm going to put it below Exo Sister because while I think as a deck overall it's better than Exo Sister, I believe has seen like 1 or 2 more tops, but also it just gets countered so much harder than Exo Sister because Castor players sneeze and they accidentally hit one of your pen zones, and they kind of just completely win. I think that this deck will have its format. I mean, hell, honestly, if Shangri-La ends up going, I think it can genuinely end up being one of the top decks in the game. But right now, you're just playing around Castor as your biggest problem. Next up, we have Labyrinth, and this will be the third and probably final deck in the Tier 1 category. It's kind of like a perfect trifecta right now. So, Branded counters Castor up because they can out their board with the Branded fusion with Dragoon. Castor counters Labyrinth because they can block off all their spell and trap zones, running them unable to play. And then Labyrinth beats Branded because they can loop cards like Eradicator, Epidemic Virus, and Dimensional Barrier. However, with that being said, Labyrinth is a deck that I feel reminds me a lot of Thunder Dragon in Eternal format. Because Thunder Dragon won a single YCS in its entire lifetime to my memory. There might be a second one, but I'm pretty sure it's just the one. And I think it was like a YCS Sydney or something like that. But it was not really the best deck. It was like the worst of the best decks. But it was really, really good at keeping lower tier decks in check. You know, a walking mistake on legs with protection is probably going to end up keeping a lot of rogue decks out of the competition. And Labyrinth is kind of similar in that boat, because while it does eventually in games 2 and 3 because of cards like Harpies, Evenly, etc., it does struggle against the other top decks. It can still bully the lower tier decks out of the game just because of the entire deck almost being revolved around counters to stuff. While I don't think this deck will be winning any of the 3 YCS events, I think it's still a really good deck if you just want to take it to get your invite or something like that, or if you're a really good or really dedicated pilot, or if you're just feeling lucky, honestly, and just praying your opponent doesn't have Harpies. I think that this could still be a very strong deck, and it deserves the Tier 1 category. Next up on our list, we have Virtual World, and surprisingly enough, this deck got a top, maybe 2, which makes it better than Eldritch and Invokes. But Virtual World is still pretty bad, so they do have the new rank 9 coming in Cyberstorm Access. Who cares? It's bad. I think the best way you could probably play Virtual World right now, ignoring like any punk shenanigans, is probably playing Sword Soul Virtual World, which is something we haven't seen since Sword Soul came out. I think it can give it a little bit of better going second potential, but when your best boss monster and endboard piece is a walking mid macro, and the best deck has a much better version of that, and wants their stuff banished, I think you're kind of just fighting a losing battle. Next up on our list, we have Mathematic, and this might be different now because it has been a while since I made that top 5 rogue deck video, but Mathematic has had the most tops out of any of the lower tier decks, and it's really not hard to see why, considering it's a deck that can pack a million hand traps and board breakers into their deck and have infinite access to 1 to 1.5 card combos and a bunch of cards like Small World to access them. And then you combine this with the fact that they can draw more hand traps off of Heat Soul. They can go into a really cool Appaloosa line with Witkid to protect from things like Lightning Storm. Super Factorial and Laplacian combined is like a custom card. You get to basically +4. And then the cherry on top is that they can 1-card OTK as well by making an access code that can attack twice. Honestly, I'm very happy to see Mathematic doing so well again, and if you are on the lookout for a Mathematic deck profile, I should be having one up at some point in this month. I don't know exactly when, but it will be from our good friend M-Rocket coming back with Mathematic. No adventure this time, just pure raw Mathematic final Sigma moment. Next up on our list, we have Sprite, and Sprite is going to go right above Sword Soul in the tier 1.5 category. It's really funny because a lot of people thought Elf would be like the crucifixion of Sprite, but it's kind of doing exactly the same, if not better than it was doing during tier format, because it's a deck with an already pretty high power ceiling compared to a lot of other decks. It's very recursive, you can fit a bunch of hand traps, and the amount of variety, most of all, is what makes this deck really difficult to out, because when you go against a Sprite opponent and you see them activate Sprite Starter, you don't immediately know exactly what Sprite build they're playing. They could be playing Sprite Brigade and end on things like Revolt for a free non-targeting banish and follow-up, and if you hit their Sprite stuff, they'll just normal summon like a Kit or something and completely screw you over. They could be playing the Live Twin build, which I don't know if it goes for the Toad or anything like that, but it definitely ends on free pops and draws alongside all of the Sprite stuff. You You could even be playing against still pure Sprite with a bunch of hand traps instead of just regular Bistials now. I even went against a Shadal Sprite player, and by that I mean technically it wasn't Shadal, but they used Gale Dogra off Gigantic Sprite to send App Cologne and then set a fucking Schism directly from the deck. It was weird, y'all. I think this deck is nowhere near dead, just completely far from it, and with the prices kind of being the lowest they've been, even with starter going up, I think now is the best time to pick up the Sprite cards before it's too late. Our next deck on this list is going to be Naturia, and Naturia is actually going to be the third deck in the 1.5 category. So when I made the top 5 rogue deck video, this had the second most tops out of the rogue decks to my memory, I believe. And honestly, this deck is pretty damn strong. Like, you have the Runic cards most of the time that can facilitate free extra disruptions and resource loops, on top of your already extensive resource loop with the Naturia stuff. Mole Cricket being able to summon itself back for basically free and do stuff on the opponent's turn is amazing. Nat Beast off of one card is amazing against the branded matchup in particular. And then to top it off, you also have 2 free Monster Negate and Destroys that also advance your plays by putting things like the Naturia Sacred Tree and the Ashizu cards in grave. This deck can just do so much. I think the main problem is that it can have consistency issues involving like the Sacred Trees bricking your hand, but you can just supplement that with the Vernasylphs and everything. And like I said, the Runic stuff is really good at helping you stall. And so I think Naturia is very, very well deserving of the 1.5 category. And I think it's only going to get better the more people experiment with it because it's just such a flexible deck. Next up on our list, we have Dragon Link, and y'all, Dragon Link won an event, guys. It's not stopping it from going at the bottom of tier 2, but it won an event, guys. Yeah, so Dragon Link, it can definitely take some people by surprise. I know I said that like a lot in this video. I might say it even more later. It's definitely not a bad deck, don't get me wrong. It's underwhelming right now when almost everyone has an out to it, because your end board can kind of struggle against the same things as Castor, Sphere Mode, Lava Golem, Nibiru hitting you as well. I mean, hell, even branded players are playing Super Poly in the main or side, and that can just completely screw you over. I think that if the deck were to get some stuff back, like Striker Dragon to more copies or whatever on the Forbidden and Limited list, then maybe it would be in a little bit better shape. But for now, I think the lower tier 2 category is the furthest it's going to still be getting. Next up on our list, we have Pure Runic, and Pure Runic is pretty neat. I'll put it above Dragon Link. I don't know exactly how many tops this deck has. I just know it has at least 1 to 2 tops. The main issue from this deck, though, comes from, like, when you rely so heavily on one type in the game, you're gonna get, like, completely blown out by anything that stops that. Naturia Beast is basically an auto-win. Eradicator Epidemic Virus, basically an auto-win. Anti-Spell, basically an auto-win unless they have the Quick Play Pop. Not to mention, if you don't have Hugin on board, you're just going to get completely destroyed by a Lightning Storm or a Harpies. And then even if you do have Hugin, you're going to get screwed over by an evenly matched. There's just so many things that out this deck. And then not to mention Ash on like the tip or on the fountain can just also completely ruin their turn. They just end up not really doing much other than trying to stall, and it just makes it for really boring and honestly not very good gameplay. So it's not really going to go very much higher than this. Now that I mention it, put it below Dragon Link. At least Dragon Link won. Next on our list, we have Trap Tricks, and I'm going to put Trap Tricks below Flunder and Mathematic, but above everything else in the tier 2 category. Trap Tricks is a really, really cool deck. I've raved all about it, and my second most viewed video on the channel now is about Trap Tricks. It used to be my channel mascot and everything. Like, this is one of my favorite decks of all time. However, a lot of people went into this deck with high hopes because of Pack and then other videos. However, a lot of people realized that they couldn't necessarily play it to its full potential, or that it wasn't very good for their current tournament scene, and so they ended up just completely backing out on it. I do think Trap Tricks is still basically just as strong as people were expecting it, even though more people are having outs to it. But it's just that a lot of people ended up kind of fumbling or playing a different deck instead, so, like after swapping out. So we really can't get like the best reading on it. It's one of those things that'll definitely take a really good pilot, and I can honestly see this getting 1 to 2 top cut slots in at least each of the YCS events. Speaking of which, check out my Trap Tricks deck profile and combo tutorial, maybe up in the annotation. Next on our list, we have Sky Striker, and funnily enough, this deck has like, I think 2 or 3 tops under its belt right now, so I'll put it at the top of Rogue. The main issue is that Sky Striker, similarly to Runic, actually, now that I think about it, man, fuck Runic. Runic can go in the top of Rogue. Actually, I'm moving it way down here. I don't even know why I put it up there. I think it literally has one top to its name. But yeah, similarly to Runic, you have the issue in things like Eradicator, Anti-Spell especially, Naturia Beast, everything like that. You do have some other things that you can at least do other than Runic, because you can like go for Hayate and everything, but you can't really stall as well as Runic. Funnily enough, Runic Sky Striker is pretty good too, though. I just really don't think it's like the most amazing thing you could play, not to mention that the Castor matchup is just absurd, and then the branded matchup, if they're on a heavy Abystial count, can end up being a really big problem as well. Next on our list, we have Tri-Brigade, and I don't even think Tri-Brigade's topped an event, y'all, but I have to put it in here because otherwise people will complain, and I am the bird up guy, and even though it hasn't really gotten any tops, I do want to put it, I'm going to put it above the Pendulum stuff and everything here, but below Exosister and Plunder because they actually have like recorded results. I think Tri-Brigade is still pretty good right now, and especially Bird Up, you know, still being like the best variant, probably will be for a long, long time. The main thing though is that, I'm probably going to go on a little bit of a tangent here, sorry. When you're playing against Castor, and they go for their full combo, they go for like the Diablosis Rip, they go for like the 3-zone block, they got the Arise Heart and everything like that, Unicorn Fenrir. Your Tri-Brigade stuff is dead because of the walking macro and everything, but then your Lyrillus stuff is also dead because they probably ripped your Zeus out of your already really tight extra deck, and so you basically just have to pray to go into Assembled and try to poke, but oh, they banished one of your Lyrolusk monsters, your zones are blocked, and now you can't really play. So the best way to play Bird Up, and I mean it was already this way in tier limit format as well, is the Blind Second variant, which I should, towards the end of the month, probably have a Blind Second Bird Up deck profile up on the channel, because people are still kind of asking me for Bird Up stuff right now, and I think the deck is definitely still playable with the Blind Second build. It's just really not in its best state because the Castor matchup can be so obnoxious. Next up on our list is Dinosaur, and Dinosaur can technically out an entire Kashan board off of just Tyranno, but when is this happening? Like when is this going to happen? I mean, technically, does Dinosaur have a top? I think it has a top, so I'll put it like above these, maybe. Like, I love Dino, and I might go ahead and go for a Dino deck profile as well, with like the 3 Litho and everything like that, even before Wild Survivors. I kind of want to go for that and like kind of mess around a little bit with it in its current state, but like this deck isn't going to be very great right now, and if you have Dinosaur, you're a Dinosaur enthusiast, unless you're playing against like a bunch of people at locals that aren't really expecting or prepared for Dinosaur, I genuinely feel like you should probably wait until Wild Survivors. So next on our list is Marincess, and Marincess is a deck that actually ended up doing a lot better than I and a lot of other people expected. Similarly to like some of the other decks right now, like Dark World and everything like that, it did very heavily struggle in the beginning of Photon Hypernova format, but lately it's just been topping left and right, and it's because a lot of people don't really have an out to a single towers and an imperm that makes your things a towers. It's topped several regionals, I think even won a regional, and it also topped YCS Lima, I believe. And so because it has all of this clout, I'm actually going to put it above Dragon Link. Like it's actually doing better than all of these other decks right now. Like the main out that you can go for against Marincess is something like a Kaiju, and while there are people on Kaijus, it's not really that significantly high. And even against their like biggest problems being Nibiru and stuff like that, don't quote me on this, but I watched the Marincess topping Lima deck profile, and he said there was a Nibiru-proof combo. And he said it in the comments. I don't know if he has the video up yet that he said he was going to post it. But apparently they have a Nib-proof combo now, which I'm assuming utilizes the Crystal Heart, because now we're back to Crystal Heart usage in the deck in order to make your just single towers instead of going for like a bigger end board. But like even on top of that, much like a lot of other Cyber decks, while it can't access them as easily, they are still a hand trap galore deck. And so it's really something that you can play, just cram a bunch of hand traps in it, few 1-card combos in there, 1.5-card combos, and just call it a day, and you can easily get away with it. I did have a Marincess deck profile recorded, but I didn't really think it was my place to make a video on it right now because I haven't really been playing the deck and it was a little bit outdated. Honestly, I kind of just wanted free content, so I deleted the footage, but if that is something you are interested in seeing, then be sure to let me know in the comments. Our next deck is going to be Rika or Plant Link, and I think that this deck is really, really strong. You got really good going first potential by having like several really strong monster outs. You know, you got monster tributes, you got monster negates, you got monster bounces, you even got monster steals, And then going second, it's also pretty good because Rika Konkon is basically a custom card. The main issues for the deck lie in certain consistency issues, you know, drawing things like the Sunvine Sowing if you play one, or the Twin or whatever. And then also, of course, having no spell and trap disruption, but at least they can dig for really important stuff by using cards like Pot of Prosperity. And I think their combo potential and even board breaking potential because of all of these other factors is not something to ignore. And then finally on our tier list, we have Tier Lament, and good riddance to this deck. It is going in the Rogue category. I'm gonna put it below, I'll put it above Dinosaur because I think it has seen a top or two here and there, and it just really depends a lot on like the perfect build, the perfect pilot, and a lot of RNG luck. Like, you can easily get this deck to continue to work. Honestly, I think Dangers might actually be a welcome addition to the deck again. Even against things like Castor, it could be annoying though. But overall, there's just so many other better decks you could play, and it has definitely lost its time in the sun. And I think I already said this, but good riddance. But y'all, that is going to do it for my April 2023 Yu-Gi-Oh! Tier list. So I did kind of base this mostly on like regional success and even YCS Lima tops and things like that. So this may end up being completely different, like the 250th YCS, especially because there's 3 different regions. But again, this is mostly statistics to my memory at least. So don't judge me too hard in the comments below, but do let me know your opinion down in the comments below because that's going to do it for the video. If you liked it, please sure to leave a like, as also this video and the channel into recommended. And if you like this content and you want to see more like it, like the rest of my monthly tier list, I'm also going to have some more tier lists like a hand trap and board breaker updated tier list for this month as well. Then perhaps consider subscribing because it supports the channel more than anything else and it's absolutely free. If you want to support the channel in a monetized way though, I do again have that Patreon that I will probably try to link in the description from now on if you do want to support it and get some pretty cool perks there. But with that being said, thank you all so much for watching and I'll see you in the next one. This is Aurora, signing off.